This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Yes, hello. This is your host, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. This is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks events, happenings in the world, happenings in politics, in science, in technology, everything that we interact with on a daily basis through the varying media that we now are surrounded by, whether it be what they call new media, which is, your tablet or your cell phone, or social media, Facebook or Twitter, or the old-fashioned media, news reports on the radio or 24/7 news cycles. All of these things we interact with on a daily basis, and we take a step back from it because we know it can be overwhelming and stressful, and we take that step back and we look at it from a higher perspective. The perspective of, I'll call it oneness, or you could call it divine mind if you want. The perspective that we are more than just these manifestations that we have created, that we exist on a higher level, if you will, and that not only do we have an existence beyond what we see temporally, but that we are actively creating these situations in which we are experiencing, and we're creating them to have the experience. The same way on, a different level, you might partake in virtual reality games, or even go to the movies, or read a book to experience something that you wouldn't normally experience. Because at our highest level of being, who we are is endless. It's indestructible. It is oneness. It is the power of co-creation. So when we create the human game in which we play, we create scenarios and make up rules that limit that. So even though you are an unlimited being, that's the truth of who you are, when you partake or interact with the creation, if you will, the hologram or the virtual reality game that we create here, we take the part of a persona that has fears and weaknesses, that is the opposite of unlimited, that feels very limited and often very scared. And that's not who we are, but it gives us the experience of that and allows us to remember who we really are by working through all of that. And maybe it sounds a little convoluted, but that's the mystics approach. That's a metaphysical approach, and that's how I kind of approach these things, by taking that step back and knowing that what we've created here has a purpose. And if we go into it, as uncomfortable as it may make us feel at first, there is energy to be gotten from it. And that energy propels us further, expands us further to become more of who and what we really are. And also overcomes or lifts us up over those things that we might, for a moment, fall prey to and believe are the defining features of who and what we are. I saw a episode of a TV series the other day, in which, and some of you may know that a few years back I did a documentary on spiritual concepts in film. It's called Spirituality in Film, A Shamanic Journey. And in it I looked at various films and how certain spiritual principles or ideals are sort of played out in the story, presented in the story. But, these ideas come through other media as well, and they certainly come through in television. And this happened to be one of these sort of supernatural shows where the lead characters are fighting demons and trying to save the world and all of that kind of things. These kinds of shows have started to become very popular. That's something to talk about too, the meaning of that, and why at this time we have these kinds of stories in our culture, and what they are telling us about ourselves. But more on that later. But I did want to talk about this particular episode because it really resonated as, this spiritual concept coming through in this story. So the demon that's being fought is called the despair demon, and it is this very giant worm-looking sort of creature. And what it does, its evil, nasty power, is it gets into your mind because it feeds off of your despair. It feeds off of your feelings of helplessness and depression. And so it must create that. And so in order to create that, it goes into your mind and it finds the things that you feel guilty about, that you feel either a sense of loss, despair, guilt, so on and so forth. And literally creates a trial scenario in which you are on trial for having done these things. The intent is to make you feel despair over the things that you have done. Now, there was a Star Trek episode decades ago in the early, the first incarnation of that series, the 1960s version, that had a similar creature that fed on people's anger. So it would set up scenarios where there would be a battle between characters, and they got Kirk and Spock to fight each other, and it fed off of these angry feelings. And the only way they defeated that creature was to start laughing and having good feelings. So this is very similar to that. But the idea that, you get trapped in your own mind, you get trapped in your own fears about yourself and your own guilt, was really quite, it just jumped out at me how resonant an idea that was, and how interesting that they should, put it in this context of this TV series. And the only way for this creature to be, vanquished is through something called the fire of joy. And this fire of joy sends or stimulates or evokes in the person their joyous sense. And when they are in joy, this creature can no longer bring them into despair. It has nothing to eat, and so it moves on. So, I won't get too much into the detail of the story. It's if you follow the story and the characters, then you'll know the things that make this particular character feel despair, and you'll get it. And the series is called Sleepy Hollow. It's an unusual take on the on the short story written by oh my goodness, was it Nathaniel Hawthorne who wrote that? But it's the story of Ichabod Crane in Sleepy Hollow in Tarrytown. But they've taken it and turned it into this very unusual story about Ichabod Crane actually being a demon fighter from the early days of the American Revolution, and it goes a lot of places that I'm sorry, it's Washington Irving who wrote that story. Washington Irving wrote Sleepy Hollow, and this TV version of it, I'm certain, has Mr. Irving spinning in his grave, if such things are possible. But it does bring out interesting concepts, and this idea of our being trapped in our minds, weighed down with guilt and fear. Well, how often does that happen to us? And how do we ignite the fire of joy to dispel it? Interesting stuff. And that leads to our topic today, which is mindfulness. I mentioned this at the end of my program last week, that Time magazine has an article called The Mindfulness Revolution, in which they talk about the concept of mindful meditation. Now, it's something I've been talking about on this show for quite a while, but it has become quite popular now, which is why it's on the cover of Time magazine. And particularly, it's very popular among the tech crowd, the Silicon Valley types, who have found that they need this mindfulness approach to get rid of the stress of their work, their jobs, which are quite demanding, 24/7 kinds of demands. And mindfulness is to me, and what I realize is that while I practice various forms of mindful meditations, I realize, and this just recently was a realization to me, that I'm not doing it enough. I need to be doing this a lot more than I've been doing it. And finding that time for the practice and finding the right balance of it is always something that you're continuing to adapt, and so forth and so on. But anyway, what is mindful meditation? Well, mindfulness is this concept of, I guess you've heard the term, be here now, being present in where you are, without judgment, but just to really experience who you are. So I'm going to read some of this from this is the Mindful Revolution article. It's on mindful.org. Mindful.org is a website that has a lot of good information about this important skill that I think everybody needs to develop. The raisins sitting in my sweaty palm are getting stickier by the minute. They don't look particularly appealing, but when instructed by my teacher, I take one in my fingers and examine it. I notice that the raisin's skin glistens. Looking closer, I see a small indentation where it once hung from the vine. Eventually, I place the raisin in my mouth and roll the wrinkly little shape over and over with my tongue, feeling its texture. After a while, I push it up against my teeth and slice it open. And finally, I chew.